Hi there, this is Architect David. Welcome to Arkida, where you can learn anything and everything about construction. For this video, we will be discussing about scope management. This is project management part 3. It's every project manager's dream that the project goes on smoothly from initiation to completion without delays and exceeding budgets. But that rarely happens in reality. Even if you discuss and plan out all the details in advance with all the project stakeholders involved, there's always something that changes the scope of the project during its course. In fact, scope creep is a huge concern for project managers, affecting 52% of the projects. By managing the scope of the project, you can document everything required to achieve the project goal and avoid issues like scope creep. Project scope management is a process that helps in determining and documenting the list of all the project goals, tasks, deliverables, deadlines, and budget as a part of the planning process. In project management, it is common for a big project to have modifications along the way. With the scope in the project management defined right in the beginning, it becomes much easier for project teams to manage and make the required changes. The project scope statement is also called its scope document or statement of work. The project scope statement details all the boundaries of the project while also establishing the responsibilities of the team. It also defines all the procedures that needs to be followed for verifying and approving the finished work. And finally, it gives the team members a definitive guideline for making project-related decisions. When documenting the scope of a project, team members and stakeholders have to be as specific as possible to avoid scope creep, a situation where some parts of the project end up taking more time and effort than initially discussed due to miscommunication or poor planning. With effective project management, teams are able to ensure that the project is finished on deadline. A proper project communication plan, which we will be discussing in communication management, is done and the final product aligns with the initial requirements. For a project manager, managing the expectations of the stakeholder and clients is one of the most challenging tasks. With a definite project scope, managers can easily stay on track and ensure that all the deadlines are being followed throughout the project lifecycle. A well-defined project scope management helps avoid common issues like constantly changing requirements, pivoting the project direction when you're already midway, realizing what the final outcome isn't what was expected, going over the discussed budget, and falling behind the project deadlines. Effective project scope management gives a clear idea about the time, labor, and cost involved in the project. It helps to distinguish between what is needed and what isn't needed for accomplishing the project. Scope in project management also establishes the control factors of the project to addresses elements that might change during the project lifecycle. Project scope is a part of the project planning process that documents specific goals, deliverables, features, and budgets. The scope document details the list of activities for the successful completion of the project. Therefore, the project scope statement is defined by understanding the project's requirements and the client's expectations. The scope statement usually contains the project objectives, project deliverables, acceptance and/or exclusions, project constraints, and project assumptions. When documenting the scope of a project, Team members and stakeholders have to be as specific as possible to avoid scope creep. Again, what is scope creep? It is adding features and functionalities of the project scope without addressing the effects on time, cost, and resources, or without the customer's approval. Wherein a situation where some parts of the project end up taking more time and effort than initially discussed due to miscommunication or poor planning. With effective project management, teams are able to ensure that the project is finished on deadline. A proper project communication plan is done and the final product aligns with the initial requirements. The process of project scope management consists of: first, you plan the scope management, which is actually the planning. You collect the requirements. You define the scope. You create a WBS, or what is called as a work breakdown structure. It is a tool that can be used for projects, programs, and even initiatives to understand the work that has to be done to successfully produce the deliverables. The fifth is to validate the scope, and the sixth is to control the scope. The first, planning scope management. In the first process in project scope management, you create a scope plan document that you can refer to in the later stages. The document mainly helps in defining, managing, validating, and controlling the project's scope. It includes the detailed project scope statement, the breakdown of all the project requirements, the expected project deliverables, project change control processes. The document doesn't have to be very detailed, it just has to fit the purpose. You can also use a previous project's scope management plan as a reference for this. The second is collecting requirements. The next step is to work out stakeholder requirements and expectations. You will be required to document all the project requirements, expectations, budgets, and deliverables through interviews, surveys, and focus groups. This is a rather important step because more often than not, stakeholders can have unrealistic requirements or expectations, and the project manager would be required to step in to find a solution that is acceptable by everyone from avoiding project delays. So at the end of the collection requirement stage, you should have the following: the stakeholder requirements, business requirements, support and training requirements, and lastly, the project requirements. The third is defining the scope. At this step, you need to turn your requirements into a well-detailed description of the service or product that you are trying to deliver through the project. You will then have a project scope statement that you can refer to throughout your project. While it is important to list what is in the scope of the project, it is just as important to note down what is out of the project scope. Any kind of inclusions to the scope would then have to go through the entire change control process to ensure the team is only working on things that they are supposed to work on. With the defined scope, you get a reference point for your project team and anyone else involved. In case there is something that is not involved in the scope, it doesn't need to be completed by the team. The fourth is making a project breakdown structure, or WBS, which stands for Work Breakdown Structure. A project breakdown structure is a document that breaks down all the work which needs to be done in the project and then assigns all the tasks to the team members. It lists the deliverables that need to be completed and their respective deadlines as well. You can use project management software for this step of the process to assign and prioritize project tasks, which will make it easier to track the entire progress of the project and avoid any unnecessary bottlenecks. The fifth is validating scope. In this step, the scope and deliverables that you have recorded need to be sent to project executives and stakeholders to get the necessary approvals. Scope validation needs to be done before starting the project to ensure that if something goes wrong, then it is easy to find where it went wrong. Then the last is controlling scope. Project managers need to ensure that as the project begins, it always stays within the defined scope. In case there are some things that need to change, then the proper change control process should be followed. And lastly, let me share to you the 5 tips for an effective project scope management. First is to ensure to create a work breakdown structure or WBS, as it will provide a breakdown of the scope statement into smaller, more manageable parcels. If you are looking or researching on time management or how to do time management, you will always read this one. Whenever you are overwhelmed with a responsibility, break it down into smaller, manageable pieces. Then work on it. The second is to avoid unnecessary work and stress. Avoid ambiguity in your scope. So you have to define it as clearly as possible. The third is to make the process of defining scope a collaborative process to prevent misinterpretation of requirements. You can use project collaboration tools to improve effective communication between your project teams. The fourth is to ensure that the scope document is not altered during the project execution to avoid any increase in scope beyond what was initially discussed. And the last, finally, take your time to consult all relevant stakeholders and define the project scope as it cannot change once it is finalized. Well, I hope you've learned something new today regarding scope management. See you on my next video. If you did enjoy this video, press like, press also subscribe to find out all the other videos that has been brought out by Arkida. Then press the notification bell to be informed of all new videos that comes out. Click the subscribe button to discover all the other videos in this site. Click the notification bell to be notified about new videos that we post. If you have additional comments, please post them down below or at our Arkida Facebook page, and I will answer all your queries. Thank you.